Yes, so my name is Ratnaprabha. I'm one of the people who teaches here at the North London Centre. And on Saturday mornings, we always have both a Buddhism element and a meditation element. And what we've been looking at for this autumn has been the three jewels. So in a way, you could hardly get more basic in Buddhism than that, and more important. So if you look around at ordained Buddhists in our order, tend to wear one of these kesas. Kesa is a Japanese word from the old Sanskrit kasaya. It's an abbreviated robe, and on it you have the three jewels flaming on a red lotus. I don't know if you can see from where you are. I'll show it to the camera a bit there. And so what are these three jewels? Well, the golden or yellow one is the Buddha jewel. The blue one is the Dharma jewel, the path of Buddhism and the teachings of Buddhism. And the red one is the Sangha jewel, which you heard about. We're celebrating Sangha Day on Sunday in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And that's the jewel of the community. So those are the three most precious things in Buddhism, and we've been looking at those. We've been looking in particular at the Buddha jewel. And the Buddha jewel means your own potential for awakening. It means the fact that everybody has got that possibility, according to Buddhism. Everybody has the potential. Wherever you come from, whatever your background, whether you're very intelligent or not so intelligent, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're old or young, whether you're from the East or the West, it's a potential that everybody has to let go of greed, hatred, and delusion, and just to sort of fully wake up. So in the same way as the difference between being deep asleep and being awake is quite a major one. So according to Buddhist tradition, the difference between being awake in the ordinary sense and awake in the full sense is just as big. So if you can imagine that. It means being mindful all the time, let's say. But I'm not going to go into that very much, and I'm not yet awake myself, so I can't describe it from first-hand experience. And I thought maybe I'd look today at the other aspect of the Buddha, that is the Buddha as the founder of Buddhism. According to Buddhism, the first person to find that path that takes you to awakening. And we had a brilliant talk by our guest Dana Yutta 3 weeks ago, which I would very strongly recommend that you have a listen to on YouTube. And she gave a number of stories that really resonated with her about the historical Buddha, the man who founded Buddhism. There was one, for example, about the dieting advice that he gave to a friend of his. And there was another one, which I was thinking of talking about today, about a very elderly man who became his disciple and learnt how to, because he couldn't travel and see the Buddha, he learnt how to visualize the Buddha, how to hold the Buddha in his mind's eye as a way of making a connection with enlightenment, the man called Pingyur. So if you're interested in that, do have a look at that talk. But I thought what I could talk about today is trees. I've just been cycling here from Bow this morning, as I do regularly, and London is so rich in trees. If you go up to Highbury Fields there and look at the beautiful plane trees and a lot of lime trees up there as well, and others, I mean, I just think we're so lucky here in London to have these trees. And autumn is a time when they start to sort of show themselves, isn't it, as the leaves turn and cover the ground. So trees are very important in Buddhism. And when you learn meditation, sometimes it's nice to meditate as if you were a tree. Has anyone ever tried that? And had that suggested? So just close your eyes. And this may not work for you. This may seem extremely silly, but just try it. If you close your eyes, and you don't have to get into fancy posture, this will only be for a minute, and just really feel your base, so you feel very grounded, and then also feel your spine rising from the ground. Now, if you imagine that you were a tree, and that reaching down from your bottom and your legs into the ground, into the London clay, there was this wonderful network of roots. And that network of roots was giving you a very, very solid foundation. No wind could blow you down. But it's also tapping into the water and the nutrients in the ground, and that's turning into sap, and the sap is being drawn up the roots, and it's being drawn into the trunk of the tree. So imagine your spine is like the trunk, and you can feel a sense of being alive, of energy, of nourishment, rising up your spine in the same way that the sap rises up the trunk of the tree. Especially maybe you could do it with your breath. As you breathe in, there's a feeling of the sap rising. Then as you breathe out, there's a sense of it spreading to every cell in your body, as if your arms and shoulders were like the branches and your head spreading out to every cell. So you're like a tree, grounded in the ground, rooted, but yet growing upwards and very solid, reaching into the sky, just as much in contact with the sky as you are in contact with the ground. So that was just a little taste of a tree meditation. Yeah. So you might want to try that, particularly as a way into your meditation, if it helped you to have that sense of being even a young sapling, just that sense of growing, but yet being very grounded and still and solid. It's really nice, I think. Now, what's this got? How does this connect with the Buddha? Apart from the fact the Buddha, of course, taught meditation, it is that the Buddha had a very, very important place for trees in his life. It was a really major thing. And you can't help noticing it when you read about the life of the Buddha and when you come across Buddhist teachings in general. So trees kept cropping up. And in particular, the Enlightenment, the final phase of his learning process, happened under the Bodhi tree. And the Bodhi tree is a type of fig tree. It's related to the fig. And these two trees here on either side of the shrine, they are not Bodhi trees, but they are Ficus benjaminii, sometimes I think called the weeping fig, and they're closely related to Bodhi trees. And so if you now go to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha gained enlightenment, we know the exact spot where he gained enlightenment. There is a Bodhi tree there. Now, I think I'll pass this around. There's a picture of it here. So if you want to pass those around, have a quick look. A lot of monks meditating under the Bodhi tree. That Bodhi tree is not the original tree, because after all, the Buddha gained enlightenment 2,500 years ago, and that tree didn't last that long. But, and this always amazes me, Sanghamita was a Buddhist woman, the daughter of Ashoka, and she traveled to Sri Lanka in about 250 BC, something like that. So not long after the time of the Buddha, maybe 100, 200 years after the time of the Buddha, she traveled to Sri Lanka, bringing Buddhism to Sri Lanka. And what did she bring with her? A little flower pot. What was in the flower pot? A cutting from the original Bodhi tree, which by now was a 200-year-old tree, so it was, venerable, but still a long way to go. She planted it. She planted it at, I never get the name right, so do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's called something like Anuruddhapada, which is one of the holiest Buddhist sites in Sri Lanka. And so we know who planted that tree. We know exactly when she planted it. And that tree is still thriving. And it's the oldest dated tree in the world. Of all the trees in the whole world, it's the one that we know of. We know exactly who planted it and when it was planted. No tree. So it's a venerable old tree. And these trees, they send down aerial roots into the ground, so it can become almost like a grove, these Bodhi trees. They're very beautiful. But the Buddha's connection with trees goes long before that tree that he sat under, which almost represents, for me, his meditation. And it goes back to his youth, in fact, to his babyhood. So I'm going to give you some readings here. Queen Mahamaya, so she was his mother, bearing the Buddha to be, when her time was come, she decided to go to her relative's house. Between the two cities, and belonging to the inhabitants of both, is a pleasure grove of sal trees, named the Lumbini Grove. And sal trees are very stately, tall trees, a bit like ash trees. At that time, from the roots to the tip of the branches, it was one mass of flowers, and from within the branches and flowers, hosts of bees of 5 colours and various flocks of birds sported, singing sweetly. When the queen saw it, a desire to relax in the grove arose. She went to the foot of a great sal tree, and stretching out her hand, she seized a branch, and thereupon she was shaken with the throes of giving birth. Holding to the branch, and even while standing, she was delivered painlessly of the Buddha to be. So that was the Buddha's birth. So he starts under a tree. I mean, I don't know if it's really, if anyone, we've got any obstetricians here, whether it's really possible to give birth standing up, supported by a tree, but that's the legend, at least the story of the Buddha. Now, there's another tree that comes up, which is his first great meditation experience, which is under a rose apple tree. While he's watching people ploughing, compassion arises. He's in the shade of the tree and he goes into deep meditation as a teenager. And then he remembers that later because he goes to leave home, studying under a number of different gurus, practicing self-mortification. None of these provided the answer. He was looking for enlightenment. He was looking for the solution to the suffering that everybody has to face. And here's another quote, from one of the old stories about the life of the Buddha. He made up his mind for enlightenment and proceeded to the root of a peepal tree, which we now call the Bodhi tree, where the ground was carpeted with green grass. Siddhartha accepted clean grass from a grass cutter, and betaking himself to the foot of the great pure tree, he made a vow for enlightenment and seated himself. And then he took up the supreme, immovable, cross-legged posture, with his limbs massed together like the coils of a sleeping serpent, saying, I will not rise from this position on the ground until I achieve the completion of my task. I will not rise. And the Buddha later described what this experience was like for him, recalling that first tree experience. I recollected how as a boy, I had entered into a natural state of meditation in the bliss of solitude, detached from sensual enjoyments and defilements, under the cooling shade of the rose apple tree. Incidentally, the rose apple tree, in India, in Hindi, I think, and in the modern Indian languages, it's known as the jambu. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the jambu tree. And the name, at least in traditional Buddhism, that is given to India is, did anyone know? Jambudvipa. It literally means the Rose Apple Island. Now, I don't know why they regard it as an island, because India is not an island, but that is what they called it, Jambudvipa, the island of rose apple trees. Anyway, a very beautiful tree, the rose apple. Then, where are we here? Yes. I thought, why am I afraid of the pleasure, of this pleasure? So in other words, he's recalling that time, which was just blissful as he was meditating. He's been practicing self-mortification, self-punishment. And then he realizes, why am I trying to follow a path of punishing myself to gain enlightenment? It's just not working anyway. And I remember you can get into meditation and it's just really lovely. It's really joyful. Maybe that is the way to enlightenment. I had been caught up in becoming, in aging, in decaying, in passing away, in sorrow, in defilements. But I saw the perils in those things. So, under the Bodhi tree, I won to the unbecome, the unaging, the undecaying, the deathless, the unsorrowing, the stainless, the uttermost security from bonds and fetters, nirvana. I saw that unshakable is freedom for me. There's no more turning of the wheel of life and death. So you have that amazing experience. You know, he tries to sort of convey of what it was like to gain enlightenment after many years of practice and striving, finally managing to do it under the Bodhi tree. And somehow, for me, the Bodhi tree symbolizes that solidity and life of enlightenment. And for a long time, nobody made any images of the Buddha. Nobody knows quite why. It wasn't forbidden, but nobody made any pictures of the Buddha. So whenever they were making carvings of the Buddha teaching or the Buddha's enlightenment, what they would show instead is the Bodhi tree with an empty seat underneath it. So when you saw the picture of the Bodhi tree, if you go, we've just done a visit to the Victoria and Albert Museum. You'll see some really lovely carvings there where you can just see the Bodhi tree and the seat, and you know that is the Buddha. That is representing the Buddha. So later, after the Exalted One had awakened to incomparable enlightenment, he sat for 7 days on his mat of straw at the foot of the Bodhi tree with his legs crossed. But you can, kneeling is okay for meditation as well. You don't have to do it legs crossed. But it's interesting he had a nice mat to meditate on, isn't it? Then in joy and ease, he rose up from his seat and he surveyed the Bodhi tree with an elephant's look and a steady gaze. The elephant's look means looking head on straight at it. He said, "Here I've realized that vow that I made so long ago. Here at the Bodhi tree, I've won the very essence of being. Here at the Bodhi tree, I woke up to enlightenment and reached the end of the jungle and the wilderness of birth, old age, and death. Here I've broken the demon who was my unskillful states of mind. Here I've broken the demon who was my limited personality. Here I've broken the demon who is the spirit of malevolence. Here it is done at the foot of the Bodhi tree." So you can see that. I don't know if this means anything to you, but for me, it's like really magic to bring that sense of nature and the natural world, and that enlightenment is a natural thing that any human consciousness is capable of. And that's the significance of the Buddha. It's, the Buddha is the founder, but he also represents something in all of us. So then, to cut a long story short, the Buddha teaches for 45 years, decides to found Buddhism. Okay, let's give it a go. Let's see whether we can communicate to other people how to maybe not necessarily gain complete awakening very quickly, but at least to move on, to become more loving, more mindful and aware, more wise, with more penetrating insight. And so he works on this for 45 years, starts a new movement, a new tradition. By the time he's 80 years old, it's big. It's possibly dominant in that area of India already. Many, many thousands of followers. Many of them have gained enlightenment, in fact. And then when he was 80 years old, he knew it was his last illness. He knew he didn't have long to live. And he lay down on a stone couch between two sal trees. So we're back full circle. The same trees, not the same place, but the same type of tree as where he was born. And one at each end of this stone couch in the sal grove of the Mallas, it said. He was surrounded by his followers. They all knew he was dying. Some were upset. The enlightened ones were not upset at all because they knew that everybody dies. And so he says to his closest disciple, closest friend, Ananda, "See, Ananda, all abloom are the twin sal trees. With untimely blossoms do they shower down upon the body of the Buddha." So imagine it's like the wind is blowing all the flowers from the trees and they're all showering down on the Buddha's body. They sprinkle it, they cover it up in worship of the Buddha. Yet not thus is the Buddha truly honored, revered, respected, worshipped, and deferred to. No, whoever brother or sister, or lay brother or lay sister, dwells in the fulfillment of the teachings, in the fulfillment of the Dharma, walking uprightly in accordance with the Dharma, he or she it is that truly honors, reveres, respects, worships, and defers to the Buddha. So that's I thought you might be interested in that, and there are many other trees that turn up in the Buddha's life. Often they have names. There's the Muchalinda tree where he met the serpent king Muchalinda not long after his enlightenment. There's the goat herds banyan and the royal banyan. They're in the same grove, and many others as well. And when he wandered from place to place, as is still the case in rural India nowadays, there will often be a holy tree in the center of the village. And under that tree would be where he would give his teachings and encourage people to learn how to meditate and how to follow his ethical teachings as well. So, I mean, what can you say? The Buddha is a huge subject, but I thought maybe that connection with trees means something, at least to me, at least. And I don't know if it gives you a sense of the Buddha, even the Buddha's personality almost, the fact that he loved nature so much and had that strong connection with it. So I've got a few copies of those readings, not enough for everybody, but I'll pass them around now. Maybe if you're very keen to have one, hang on to one, and otherwise you could share it and have a look at it. Does anybody have any comments or questions? And if you're online, please do put something in the chat if you'd like to. Yes.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned the Buddha first embarked on self-mortification.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why he did that? Was that part of the tradition, or what was going on there?
It does seem it was in, and still is nowadays actually, within the Indian spiritual traditions, is the idea that you can make spiritual progress by extreme fasting, by sitting in the sun unprotected, by standing on one leg, even by holding your arm up in the air. And people still do this kind of thing. And there's the sense that if only the flesh is the problem, our body is making us do all sorts of naughty things. And so therefore, if we can go into the spiritual realm by mortifying the flesh. And you get this in other religions as well, don't you? And the Buddha tried that for 6 years, and said he went to extremes in it. And then he's almost dead from starvation. You'll sometimes see statues of the Buddha. If you, again, in the V&A, you'll find this, with his ribs sticking out and his face really gaunt, because he's been fasting for such a long time. And it didn't work. It didn't get him anywhere. And so it's then that he remembered that incident under the rose apple tree, and he thought, you don't have to punish yourself to gain progress spiritually, which is a bit of a relief, actually, because I don't think I would go for it myself. Yes.
Unrelated question, like the posture where Buddha says it's like cross-legged,
yes.
Like how we sit in today's world is like more in a different posture. So
yes.
Like why that adaptation, like how that has changed over years, like because that's a very different position in which we do meditation today.
Well, the cross-legged full lotus posture is the best posture for meditation. There's no doubt about that, in my mind at least. However, if you were brought up in ancient India, I don't know about modern India, but in ancient India, you would live in a house without any chairs. You would sit on the ground from a small child. So the flexibility that you need in your hips would be there the whole time. Now, if you've done a lot of yoga, or if you're naturally flexible, you may find you can sit cross-legged. I mean, I always sit cross-legged, but I don't do full lotus. What I do is the Burmese posture with one foot in front of the other, which is a cross-legged posture. So you may find you can do that. But then, especially in Japan, they developed the kneeling posture, which they call the thunderbolt posture. Kneeling astride the cushions is also a really good way to meditate. And sitting in a chair is also fine. So the Buddha never said you won't gain enlightenment unless you sit cross-legged. But it's a great part. I could go into why it's such a good posture if you can get into it. But what you need is stability, you need comfort, and you need to feel grounded, But thanks for the question, yeah. Yes.
I was just curious, after the self-mortification phase, and then he found the middle path.
Yes.
At what point, and is there anything written about this, did the breathing technique come to be? Like, how did that come out of his?
That's a very good question, actually, and it's not completely clear, but at least according to some traditions, he was doing the breathing meditation before his enlightenment. So that the very first thing he tried, when he remembered as a boy, when he'd done that hadn't been through doing any meditation practice, it happened spontaneously. He'd just gone into very deep concentration. But it's said that when he sat down under the Bodhi tree, the first thing he did was mindfulness of breathing. And so maybe he intuitively realized there's something about the breath. It's almost as if the trees breathe as well, I think, in a way, in a much slower way. There's something about the breath that means that you're sort of making that connection with the ground underneath you and with the world around you as well, I think. So it's a lovely meditation, I think. Yeah. Yes.
There's a BBC program we watched a couple of months ago, which suggested that the Buddha shrine and the Buddha statues, so the discipline came, or the art came, maybe after Buddha's death in India from Alexander the Great, when he came.
Yes,
east.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, yes.
Before that, this lovely image we see, wasn't there. I don't know how.
I mean, I'm glad we have these statues of the Buddha. You know, I find it inspiring. If it had been an empty shrine there, or even just a picture of a tree, I find it inspiring to see that. But of course, it takes a very, very good sculptor to produce something that approximates to an enlightened human being. And so some people say that because the Greeks were such great sculptors, when they finally arrived in the north of India with the conquests of Alexander the Great, people looked at their sculptures and said, okay, I didn't think we could do it, but I now think we can. But I'm not convinced by that, because there was art, very, very good sculptural art in India before the Greek art arrived. And I think it may be a little bit of one of those Eurocentric things that says, oh, the poor Indians, they didn't know how to sculpt the human form properly, and they had to learn it from Europeans. I think there may be a little touch of racism in that myself, but I'm not sure about that.
Are there any other theories as to why the Buddha wasn't depicted for a long time?
Well, I mean, some people say, it's often said in a way, is the Buddha really a human being? Or is he a god, or what? And in a way, this is explicitly dealt with. They say he's not a god. He's not a god. He definitely was a human being, but then he becomes an enlightened human being. And although you can depict the human form, can you really convey what enlightenment is? And so you have to remember when you look at the Buddha, this is just the human form of the Buddha, but the consciousness of the Buddha is something that cannot be depicted. And maybe that was the strong feeling in early Buddhism. So that's why they use symbols instead. But we don't really know. There are some records about it, but we don't really know, I think. The last one, maybe, yeah.
Are you a dendrologist? Because you seem to know quite a bit about it.
Well, we do have a dendrologist here who's in our Sangha, Stira Shraddha, who's a tree expert, and he's an arboriculturalist. But no, I just love trees myself. But I was thinking as I was cycling in today, there are so many of those trees that I do not know what they are. Because London is full of non-native trees, isn't it? And some of them are so beautiful. Are you keen on trees as well?
Well, I quite like them, but I have a second cheeky follow-up question, because I've seen the V&A carvings that you described.
Yes.
And one of the things that struck me was that actually I personally prefer those.
Yeah.
Because seeing the Buddha, it always felt to me in an almost strange position to non-self.
Yeah.
Because if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it may well be that is the case, yeah. And so maybe if you want to have a shrine to meditate with at home, maybe don't have the Buddha on it deliberately, and light the candles, have the flowers, have the incense and everything, but maybe even just have a bonsai on there. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
We've got a question online.
Online, okay, that'll be the last question then, yeah.
If the Buddha committed himself to sit under the tree until he achieved enlightenment, how is it this not attachment, the kind that we are cautioned against?
Ah, interesting, yes. Yeah, I was thinking about this whole issue with respect to Dana Yutta's talk, because I can't go into detail, but the Pingya story that she told is of people who are being taught very, very early on in Buddhism about how to gain enlightenment. And there are three things that the Buddha emphasizes when he's teaching these people. One of them is mindfulness, being aware as you can. Another one is appreciation. And there's a huge amount of appreciation in those sutras, like really valuing other people, including the Buddha himself. And then the third one is desirelessness. Now, I've been trying to get my head around this ever since I became a Buddhist decades and decades ago, the whole business of desirelessness. Because clearly, if you're trying to do anything, there must be some desire involved, mustn't there? You're sitting under the Bodhi tree saying, I'm not going to get up until I gain enlightenment. Isn't that a form of clinging, a form of craving? And I don't really have the answer to this. I think it's one of those koans, the koan is the old Zen riddle, that you need to just ponder on. You do need somehow, as living beings, desire is what makes us up, is what makes our energy. But yet there's something that goes wrong with it. And this is when we try to repeat gratification. So it seems to me that's the main issue. It's as if something nice happens, or we meet somebody that we fancy, and we think, okay, great, at last I found the solution to all my problems. It's to keep on repeating that particular pleasure, or to have that person as my possession forever. Do you see what I mean? So it's not that there's anything wrong with the gratification, with the pure, just the pleasure of sitting under a tree and meditating or whatever, but there seems to be a problem if you're trying to go into the pleasures that arise in your life and think you can just perpetuate them and everything will be perfect. Actually, life is full of pleasures and difficulties. And somehow you can get into a blissful state where whatever happens is okay with you. But then there's the next stage on. If everything that happens is okay, you've reached that state of peace. Does that mean you don't do anything? I mean, does that mean that you look at the Middle East or you look at Ukraine or even you look at your neighbors and say, oh, well, everything's fine, don't worry, you know? No, you don't, because then compassion arises. So there is, again, it's a koan. I don't want to say I can understand it, but it does seem to me that you do need something that urges you to make a difference in the world. But that's not the same as the kind of clinging or craving that causes suffering. That's as far as I can say, really. I don't know.
Do you think that they distinguish between aspiration and desire?
That might be a way to put it, yeah. They sometimes talk about two kinds of chanda. Chanda is the word for desire. And you can have kama chanda, which means desire for gratification. Or you can have dhamma chanda, which means desire for dharma. And in this case, dharma means not just the teachings, but the truth and reality itself. So, yeah, maybe that's it. There's two kinds, you could say, yeah.